Alfred Hitchcock is one of the most famous and influential filmmakers of all time. He's also constantly referenced in pop culture. His reputation as a personality sometimes overshadows his achievements as an artist. He pioneered the suspense and horror genres, adding his own fears into his stories, and his movies have a distinct style. When you see one of his movies, you know it's a Hitchcock movie. He made over 50 films during his career, breaking boundaries to make way for what would become tropes of the industry. Hitchcock is described as an auteur, meaning a filmmaker whose individual style and complete control over all elements of a production give a film its personal and unique stamp. Despite most films being a collaborative process at the time, we believe that Hitchcock's exploration of scopophilia and his mastery of suspense as depicted in his 1954 film Rear Window has solidified him as one of, if not the most famous auteur in film history. Rear Window, which was both produced and directed by Hitchcock, follows a photojournalist named L.B. Jeffries, played by James Stewart, who has recently broken his leg while attempting to capture the perfect picture during his previous assignment. The setting takes place primarily in Jeffries' apartment. Out of his rear window, he faces a courtyard and has a large view into the apartments of his many neighbors. This is where the concept of scopophilia becomes the anchor to which the movie is tethered to, and the majority of shots are seen from far away at a distance, putting the viewer right into the eyes of the main character. Scopophilia can be defined as the pleasure involved in looking at other people's bodies as particularly erotic objects without being seen either by those on screen or by other members of the audience. The first example that we see in this film is a character known as Miss Torso, a single, young, and fit dancer. Miss Torso has many comments made about her appearance and is highly sexualized by the men in the film, such as Jeffries, Detective Thomas J. Doyle, and the many men that appear around the young lady's apartment. The characters are caught many times watching her change out of her clothes. This is scopophilia. Another example in the film is Miss Lonely Heart. Miss Lonely Heart is a single woman who is desperately searching for love, and in one scene she is spotted in an uncomfortable situation with a young man in her apartment. The other characters in Jeffrey's apartment, Lisa and Stella, watch the scene unfold from the window above as Miss Lonely Heart has to defend herself against an aggressive drunk. Creating suspense in this way is a staple of Hitchcock's filmmaking. Scenes like this almost feel uncomfortable to watch as an audience member because of the angles and film techniques that Hitchcock utilizes. Bose explains, Rear Window is a manifestation of Hitchcock's hypothesis about our perversions. All of us are reduced to the status of voyeurs. Even though our morals may say otherwise, we as the audience continue to watch these types of films, because we love anticipating what will happen next. This technique is used in many films of Hitchcock's, most famously in the film Psycho, in which the camera shows the point of view of Norman Bates walking in on a woman and stabbing her in the shower. The audience of the time was shaken by this scene, and some even left the theaters as they felt so guilty for looking at the woman on screen in a place as private as the shower. Hitchcock's movies are immediately recognizable for these types of suspenseful elements. Hitchcock was involved in every role in creating these moments, which fostered his reputation as an auteur. In an article written for the New York Times titled Master of Suspense, Hazards of Railroading, among other things, Alfred Hitchcock explains why he chose to make short cameo appearances in all of his films. The significance of this is often lost on the viewer due to the insignificance of the roles themselves, all of which could go easily unnoticed, and most not involving any dialogue. For example, he makes a background appearance in Rear Window, winding a clock in one of the neighbors' apartments. Compilations exist online of his many cameos in his own films. However, in the article, he explains a much deeper meaning behind this choice. For starters, he explains how he would purposefully jump into a scene without warning so as to keep the crew on their toes. He claims that these moments on set in front of the camera also gave him a more intimate look into the film itself. Not surprisingly, this same ideology greatly influenced how he created suspense in his films, stating, I find that the easiest way to worry people is to turn the tables on them. Make the most innocent member of the cast the murderer. Make the next-door neighbor a dangerous spy. Keep your characters stepping out of character and into the other fellow's boots. Despite that article being written in 1950, 4 years before the release of Rear Window, these strategies are fundamental to the suspense of this movie. The main character, Jeffries, after spending almost the entirety of the film spying on his neighbors, becomes involved in a mystery after he witnesses what he believes to be a neighbor murdering his own wife. He spends the rest of the film trying to convince his detective friend, Thomas J. Doyle, played by Wendell Corey. In a climactic scene, the main character's love interest, Lisa, played by Grace Kelly, who Jeff insists doesn't have what it takes to live a dangerous lifestyle due to her upper-class mannerisms and interests, steps out of character by breaking into the murderer's apartment to look for clues while the murderer is gone. This development takes Jeff and the audience by surprise, which is only heightened when Lisa is caught and the murderer turns to face Jeff for the first time. From turning neighbors against each other and breaking out of character, to literally turning the tables on both Jeff and the audience, going from the observer to the observed, Hitchcock, as a self-proclaimed master of suspense, demonstrates how his unique approach to filmmaking is based on these core principles. Additionally, because these principles are tied to the director, they inevitably influence his films, thereby demonstrating his role as an auteur. In spite of Hitchcock's achievements as a director, there are those who find the auteur theory itself a flawed concept that overshadows the rest of the crew involved in the filmmaking process. Referring to Hitchcock as the author takes some attention away from its influences. An author named Cornell Woolrich inspired the film's premise with his 1942 short story, It Had to Be Murder. Additionally, Hitchcock also drew from the real-life murder cases of criminals like Patrick Mahone and Dr. Holly Harvey Crippen, who would inspire the nature of the murder in the film. Basing a movie off of a book or real-life events was fairly uncommon at the time. We should also not take for granted the role of the other crew members. For example, cinematographer Robert Burks, editor George Tomasini, and writer John Michael Hayes, all of which worked on several of Hitchcock's films, including Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. And all of whom influenced Hitchcock's films in ways that are not entirely self-evident. This is when Hitchcock's self-advocacy becomes so important. Without getting a look behind the scenes, it's impossible to understand Hitchcock's true contribution as an auteur, but we do know, for the most part, he had total creative control over his films, but to an unknown specific extent, considering the other crew members. In conclusion, Hitchcock films have a special spot in film history. He's incorporated many unique ideas into his filming, from using suspense as a key element, to getting ideas from real murder events to make the movies come alive. Hitchcock doesn't change his style often when it comes to directing. Consistency is a trait among many of his films, which is a feature of his films that really stand out. Hitchcock will forever have an impact on the film industry, and many people still to this day look at his work and try to use many of his ideas. Thanks for watching.